The following program is brought to you by the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research. To learn more, visit www.mcsilver.org, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter.
Thank you for your welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here for many reasons. There are many very dear old friends that are there in the audience, and newer friends like Deborah. But most of all, I think the fact that it's a group of people who care about, believe in the equal dignity and value that we have, which drives you to work with homeless people who are in this room. My country India is a country of simultaneously of great wealth and great poverty. Forbes magazine brings out its list of the wealthiest people in the world, and normally among the top 10 you have 2 or 4 names of people who are Indian. But every third malnourished child in the world is also Indian. Every third person who sleeps hungry in the world is also Indian. And I've not quite got the data right, but I believe that probably every third homeless person in the world is also Indian. And it is that paradox of great wealth and great poverty that worries me greatly, that worries me in the past. But sometimes I think that if I was born 100 years from now and was trying to write about India and indeed the world in this country as well, what would I say is the most defining feature of our times? And I would say it is inequality with indifference. And it is not just the fact of inequality, but the extent to which normatively we, people of privilege, accept that inequality as at least inevitable, but actually legitimate. I sometimes feel it's like the exile of the poor from our conscience and consciousness. And in India, it comes out most, this indifference is manifested most dramatically in the attitude to homeless children and homeless people in general. You cannot drive home from a party or from work in Delhi without seeing homeless children. On a cold winter night, Delhi is not as cold as New York, but it gets to near freezing temperatures. And when I put my daughter to bed, tuck her in, after she's been to the best school in the city, she's had a great meal, she's played with her video games, she's safe, she's protected. It doesn't worry us that a kilometer away, just a kilometer away, is another child, just her age, who will sleep, who probably found her food in a trash heap, who will sleep under freezing temperatures. Street kids tell us that there's a reason why many of them don't cover themselves with even a sheet. What do you think would be the reason?
They don't have it.
No, they haven't. It's an invitation to be late. And so you have a child who has to negotiate life on those terms. When she wakes up early in the morning, she picks rags, she never sees the inside of the school. And the fact that not even for a fraction of a second does it worry us, worries me deeply. The world is said to become much smaller, but that 1 kilometer becomes the longest distance in the world. and that child will never be able to walk that distance, 1 kilometer. My child will never walk that distance. And in many ways, there's in New India, I've just written a book which I've titled "Inequality with Indifference: The Story of New India," and I think that from the time that I was a child, inequality was always there, but the comfort level of that inequality, the acceptance, the normative acceptance of that inequality has grown enormously. And therefore, the richest man in India builds a 27-story house in Bombay as a home for 4 people with 600 domestic help. And we think how it's not thought of as vulgar, but glamorous. In a city where 200,000 people sleep on the streets. And therefore, for many reasons, when I moved back, I quit the civil service in 2002 after the Gujarat massacre and moved back into Delhi. I felt that among anything else that I do, I must work directly with homeless people because, as I said, for many reasons, but also because they represent this indifference most dramatically. And we started working with homeless children and moved on to working with homeless men and women. And I'll talk today about what I've learned about their lives and who they are and what I have learned from them as well. Homeless men and women actually have very different journeys or pathways to the streets. It's extremely gendered in many ways. We find that homeless men tend to come to the streets substantially in order to, what drives them to the streets initially is the responsibility to take care of your families back in the village who are starving, who have no work, no futures. And men are expected to be strong and to provide. And so they come into the cities and some of them succeed in finding some kind of work. Some of them succeed in finding learning about homelessness some of them succeed in getting some kind of work and sending money home. And they choose homelessness more or less as a way of life to keep their families alive. Because if they spent on themselves, there would be no money to send back home. And that's a significant segment of the homeless men that you see. But there are also homeless men who can't, who don't succeed, who can't, who are not strong enough, who aren't able to cope with the rigors of trying to earn money and send it back home. And that leads to an enormous decline of self-esteem, and you start breaking your bond with your family. It's a slippery downward path. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I was just saying that I've learned that there's a difference between extreme poverty and destitution. Extreme poverty, destitute people are also extremely poor. But in addition to being extremely poor, there's also a breakdown of all social relations and bonds. There's a breakdown of self-esteem. There's a breakdown of hope. And that's what I see a lot within our work with homeless, destitute men. the journey of homeless women is very, very different. Homeless women are almost without exception on the streets because of extreme domestic violence. And they don't have their marital home is not able, the parental home is also not able to take care of them. They finally end up on the streets. And their lives are, I think, probably the single segment of people who live with the greatest violence as a way of life. When we set up our first women's shelter, I remember asking the women, what has changed most in your life? And this woman said that for the first time in 17 years, when I close my eyes at night, I am sure that nobody is going to rape me by the morning. And then you realize that in our social class, one such episode, God forbid, will scar you for life. This is something that you have to live with. So what drives them to the street is violence, and what their life on the streets becomes is concentrated in this violence. And just as an aside, December a year ago, Delhi had a gang rape of a medical student, and it was a very rare moment of public empathy, because the kind of young people came onto the streets expressing, it was like a personal tragedy that they experienced with a girl whose name they didn't know, whose face they didn't know. And I welcomed that, but I also wrote about how dramatically it also demonstrated to me the limits of our empathy. Because on the same streets every night when homeless women are raped, there's never a candlelight march that we are driven to, because we don't see them as people like us. And then, of course, children have their own stories. I won't spend too much time talking about children, because that's a story in itself. But I have a small film brought from this.
पापा ने मेरे मम्मी को मार दी
मजबूरी यही है जो यहाँ फुटपाथ पे सोता हूँ। घर द्वार तो आई नहीं, घर द्वार होता तो कोई आदमी फुटपाथ में सोता है क्या?
और जहाँ सर छुपाने की जगह मिल जाती है वही मेरा घर है।
अब यही नहीं पता हम कहाँ से आए हैं और संभाला ही फुटपाथ में किया। बारिश हो जाए तो पुल के नीचे चले जाते हैं, ठंड होती है तो रजाई लेके सोते हैं किराए की।
बस कमाई होती है, 150 रुपये कमाई हो जाती है। क्या करते हैं? सिलेक्शन देता हूँ, गम बुलाने के लिए।
निशा हमको अच्छा नहीं लगता है। निशा करने के बाद ये छाती में दाग लग जाता है, आदमी मर जाता है। निशा करता है उसमें पैसे नहीं लगता है। निशा नहीं मत करो, एकदम अच्छा सा पढ़ाई करो।
सपने क्या, जिसका कोई आगे नहीं पीछे नहीं, सपने क्या हो सकता है?
मेरी ख्वाहिश भाई कौन पूरी कर देगा, और क्या मेरे दिल में अरमान है। अरमान है नशा छूट जाए तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, जिंदगी दूसरी मिल जाएगी। अब
I felt it was really important for us to understand and to learn about their lives and to talk about them. So with a group of young people, we spent about a year talking to homeless people in 4 cities, and we wrote a report which I shared with Kim as well. Many things that we learned about their lives, partly the journeys that bring them onto the streets, which I briefly talked to you about. But the lived experience, firstly, the extremes, the most obvious is the extremes of climate and coping with, with extremes of climate. And people literally dying on the streets. And one of the things we wanted to know along the way was how many people die on the streets. And there's actually no records really, except one proxy record that we got, which was of unclaimed bodies of the homeless. So homeless people who die, but mostly there's enough solidarity among the homeless to pool money and ensure that they have some kind of cremation, or those who don't have any of that are the only ones that come out. And two of my young colleagues spent 6 really grisly months going to crematoriums and cemeteries and collecting this information. And we were able to find that there's at least 5 times, just with unclaimed bodies, 5 times more chances of dying on the streets as if you're homeless compared to not being homeless. But we were also surprised with some other findings. One was that we expected that winter was the time that people would die the most. But we found actually it was the summer months. And we realized that it's the unremitting heat and having nowhere to go within it. Next was our rainy season. We have 3 seasons, where probably the refuse around which, and then there was winter. And trying to live and sleep, just simply sleeping rough in these circumstances. Illustratively again, you find in summer months, you find the largest number of homeless people sleeping on traffic islands, or right next to the road. And I couldn't figure out why they would do this, because that's really risky, and the traffic is continuously moving, and you hear of people get run over, etc., etc. So why don't they go into the parks, etc.? And they said it's the mosquitoes, and it makes it impossible to sleep. And the traffic fumes drive away the mosquitoes, so you have to sleep closest to the traffic fumes, so that you can at least sleep through the night, but then you consume all of this. What do they do when it rains? They talked about it in Chennai, one of the cities. They said that actually they go to cinemas, they start buying tickets, and they keep watching the film and hoping till midnight that the rain will stop. And if not, then there's those little edges of the shop where they sit through the night. So firstly, just coping with that, and then was the lack of safety, the lack of protection. Almost, we work with homeless women's children, and I've learned now that most of those children are actually children of rape, because these women are on the streets and they keep. Then there's other findings. I'll just give you 1 or 2 more. We found that paradoxically, living homeless is extremely expensive. So, how would that be? Why would it be so expensive?
To the person or to the system?
To the person. See, at home, many things that we take for granted. You have cooked food. Here you have to buy your food every time. And it's not only unhygienic and sort of oily kind of food, etc., but it's also more expensive, much more expensive. Every time you go to the toilet, you have to pay. Every time you want to bathe, you have to pay. Even for a pot of water, you have to buy. And on winter nights in Java Street, etc., you actually have entrepreneurs who hire out blankets at night. And I've seen on these winter nights actually people making a choice, a very hard choice. You pull a rickshaw through the day and you earn 130 rupees, you spend about 80 or 90. If you spend on food, you have to keep a little bit sent home. So they make a choice between actually eating that evening meal or having a blanket through the night and so on. So the cost of public services. In fact, one man in Patna said to us that Every time I look into the mirror, I'm worried the mirror is also going to ask me for money to show me my face, because everything costs money around the streets. And so that's another sort of rather dramatic realization that came to us through this study. Couple of other things. One was the intense loneliness of homelessness. Your uprootedness from your family, from any kind of sense of community, and the psychosocial stresses of being homeless is something that came to us, and how people cope with it. And of course, drugs is one way, but there are other ways that we encounter on the streets. I find we find remarkable new relationships that people form. I mean, you sometimes find a street child who I'll tell you one story. There was this woman who was the classical homeless mentally ill woman, with matted hair, and she used to sit in just one spot outside New Delhi railway station, and she used to be there. Kids used to stay with her, those kind of things. And we were working. I mean, my colleagues were working with the kids, trying to recruit them to trust them and move into a hostel and start a new life. And then one boy said, "I can't because this woman depends on me." And she wasn't his mother, but he just adopted her. And he used to, with all his backpicking, etc., he would then take some money and buy some food for her, go to her, sit down. And he said she won't survive without food. And she was, used to be angry with the rest of the world with this boy she was pretty gentle. And finally we decided that we would take the boy with this lady to a first boys shelter. And we took a jeep and we packed both of them before they knew what was happening, and took her there. And she lived for about 2 years before she died. And I just saw the transformation, just because street kids are actually much more accepting of difference. So they just accepted her. She was around, and gradually she started bathing. Gradually she used to read, and the little boy was also around. And these are not unusual. I mean, one really finds the most exceptional bonds, and you adopt people who actually, if they were your own family members, many of us would want to abandon them. But these are relationships they choose because it's so important for human beings. I was just talking to Deborah and the students a little earlier. I do believe that in some of our mental health work, when people are alone and isolated, enabling them to form new kinds of families, not a heterosexual sort of conventional family, but families in other ways is probably really important. So the loneliness of being homeless is something that's very important. And the fourth thing that I would highlight is the extraordinary hostility of the state. And there's in a sense, for the rural poor, there is a sense that the rural poor have rights and the state has positive duties to them. With the urban poor, for some reason, there's a kind of implied hierarchy of citizenship in which the state only has duties to good, legitimate citizens like you and I, against the poor who occupy our cities, who are seen as vaguely dangerous and so on. So the only government programs for the urban poor tend to be demolish, block, push out, etc., etc. Not programs to enable them to build a better life. And it's again extreme for the homeless. And I remember one night when going out and we were doing a round with the homeless, and I saw this couple of police constables. They were just thrashing a set of homeless people. It was a typical sight. I just decided to go up to him and I said, "Please tell me, why are you beating them?" So he said, "No, they're dangerous people. We have to free the city. There have been bomb attacks. We have to free the city from terrorists." So I said, that's really interesting. But have you ever in the world heard of a terrorist who is homeless? And just think, where would he hide his bombs, where would he put his RDX, and so on. And if you really have to randomly sort of beat up people for being homeless, perhaps if you went to the over-oriented continent, you would have a greater probability chance that you encounter a terrorist, etc. But there is that, that sense of, we regard them as vaguely dangerous, and going back somewhere to the colonial idea of the poor being responsible, the very poor being even more responsible, and that sense of shame that they internalize comes to the way that the state treats them. So I think the important thing to recognize there is not just that the state is neglectful of its poorest citizens. That is something that they could live with. The state is in active war with its most vulnerable citizens. And that is the paradox that worries me a lot. And I've looked at homeless people in many parts of the world. Actually, now whenever I travel, which is not very often, I've tried over the last few years to actually find out, look at what work is happening with the homeless and so on. And you see the city in a completely different light. And it tells you a lot about that society. Just to sort of again deviate a little bit, I was in Copenhagen last winter around the same time, it was -25 snow, and they called me. Actually, there was some talk in the Danish Parliament, and I was asked to speak, in fact, about inequality to Danish members of Parliament, and I just had gone a day earlier, and I said I wanted to see what's happening on this. And then it turned out that the Danish government has a policy of only taking care of Danish homeless people. So I said, how many are there? There are almost none. So then who takes care of the rest? And so they said that the church does. So I said, can I meet somebody? And so they took, and I met this young woman who was about my daughter's age, and a woman pastor. Very lovely, very kind person. But she said with all her resources, all the churches together take care of 90 homeless people in Copenhagen. So I said, how many are there? She said, a few thousand. So what happens to the rest? So, and that's when I spoke to the parliamentarians, I said that, this distinction, whether you're Danish or not, is that a conversation that we should be having at -25 degrees? And should we be having that conversation in Scandinavia, which I do regard as, in many ways as the best form of government that we have in the world today? So I think this hostility, not just neglect of our most vulnerable citizens, is something that is much more universal and plays out in many different kinds of ways. About three winters back, the usual story of people dying on the streets. That's the only time that the press carries occasional stories, and it deeply stirs people's conscience. One particular incident happened, I think it was December 25th, and they pulled down one small shelter that we managed to get, saying that they wanted to construct a park there. In the height of winter, they wanted to construct a park and pull down a shelter. And on that day spot, a balloon seller, a young man, died. So I thought that it's just something snapped up. So wrote a letter to the Supreme Court judges, and for some reason it touched him, the judge, and he called for. He said, I'll hear it tomorrow morning itself. And so we all went, and the government lawyer went, etc. And then he said, why can't you provide more shelters? And so he said, we need time, I need to discuss with my officials. And I remember the judge used this phrase, he said, my patrons have no time to wait for your discussions. So discuss over lunch, and I'll hear it after lunch. It was a very rare discussion with me. And so sure enough, we all gathered after lunch. And then he said that I want shelters to be the very minimum that the state must provide to homeless people across the country. And so we got that order, and for 2-3 years, shelters for the first time have come up in many large Indian cities as a result. But the point that, in working with homeless people, and I just talk about 2 or 3 learnings was that we must not look at the shelter as the destination of a homeless person. We must look upon it as the first step in a long journey that we have to take together. We must look upon it as it's like in a disaster situation. There's an earthquake, everything is fallen, the person's sort of life is broken down. So the first thing you'll do is to create a safe space for the person to rebuild their life. But you're not expecting that person will live in your camp for the rest of his or her life. Homelessness is really like an endemic, ongoing, unending, unmitigated disaster. And in that situation, we must look at the shelter as the first place where you have a place of safety, where you have time to heal and to pick up and understand and pick up the pieces of your life. I've seen shelters, not just the ones that have come up in India, but I've seen a lot in many cities in the US actually, and I find that even at the best, like Boston, I was told was one of the best places where services are there. But the shelters there are basically like an assembly line kind of thing. You come at night, you line up, you have a place to shower, you go to sleep. You have to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning, people wake you up and drive you out. Then you do what you like, and then you come back, and you have to come back on time, then you get into the shelter, live, and that's the principal engagement. And I find that really problematic for all of us, but also very challenging. What does it mean to help rebuild lives? So in the work that we've been trying to do, so having fought the first battle was for the state to accept responsibility. So that got done through the Supreme Court orders, and then we got schemes, and now shelters are coming up. But then we need to move on to what we need to do next. So my colleagues and I, one can look at it in 3 clusters, broad clusters. The first is the psychosocial, which is actually helping people regain self-esteem, understand a little bit about their lives, structure. So you must treat them with dignity and respect. So it should not be a space. Very often we assume that for a poor person, especially a destitute person, dignity is the last thing that is important. Actually, my experience has been the very opposite. You and I have still a robust sense of selfhood. That somebody is insulting to you, you insult him back, and you get on with your life. But for somebody who's really been pushed down that low, if you treat them insultingly, they will just not. And I was for the Urban Health Mission, I was asked to chair a committee which was to help design health services. We spoke to a lot of people, and we found that the principal reason that they avoid public health services to the extent that they exist is because of the insulting behavior. And they say that they don't even touch you, they put a finger there at the most. Your child is brought, they won't even hold the child or do it. They make taunting remarks if you're having a baby, saying, why don't you think about, why are you making noise now, why don't you think about when you're having sex with your husband or something like that. And so something like that happened, and they won't come back to that service. And with a great deal of persuasion, I got the Chief Minister of Delhi to start a small soup kitchen kind of program for the first time. But they did it again in this extremely insulting kind of way, where they were, it was really normally, on the pavement, they'd all have to crowd together and they'd sort of throw food at people, etc. And I used to, our Chief Minister's name was Sheila Dixit. And in the conversation, I used to find it quite funny because people would talk about their lives, and then they'd say, okay, and when he was saying that he was at the very bottom, he said, I had to eat Sheila Dixit's food, he used to call it. And then, the other person would say, and then he'd say, I've never eaten Sheila Dikshit's food. And then somebody would say, no, but I saw you that day. And you were eating. So, that it was really interesting that the food was not as important as the way that it was offered. And so, the first set of activities that we had to do, and we've learned that it's not that hard to help people if you, and so, with my colleagues I say, the simple rule is unconditional respect. And if you can do that, things start working out, and don't judge. Think that if I was, if my life had placed me in that situation, would I have hoped even as well as this person? What choices would I have made, etc., etc. So we found that it's actually been quite possible over a period of time, and you have, the shelter should be a cheerful place, should be a welcoming place, there should be activities, you have a structured day, have sports, think about things. I mean, many of them don't get work in the day for long periods, have activities during the day and so on and so forth. So that's the first step, and we found some degree of success there. The second segment of our work is around health. We found really, the physical, mental health issues are really strong. And then started understanding what are the barriers to seeking healthcare. And we found public hospitals never accept them. And when we went, we found a very strange reason why, apart from stigma and the fact they said they don't have an address, they don't have this, etc. But one unexpected barrier was that in India, culturally, everybody goes to a hospital with somebody in the family who does a great deal of para-nursing. So the biggest, after they got over everything, they said, but we cannot keep these people because there's no one to sit by the bedside and they run around and they buy the medicine and they do this, etc. So now when we get, now they agree when my colleagues take somebody into a public hospital, they admit it, but we have to hire 2 people on daily wages to do bedside care before they're willing to keep them. But then we found that an even greater problem was what happens after discharge. Because after they kept you 4 or 5 days, then quite legitimately they say, go home and let your family take care. I don't have a home, I don't have a family. But we don't have a plan for that. And we have still 500,000 people who die of TB in India. I see that a significant number of these will probably be single male migrants who have no one to take care of them. So your TB is diagnosed, but you have no place where you can rest, and nutritious food, and you have to keep trying to work, and your health declines and you get killed. Public health colleague of mine, she did a small sample study for 18 homeless people, and she found that 3 of them had become permanently disabled simply with a simple injury. They had nowhere that they could go for rest, and those injuries became compounded and permanent disabilities. So the simple need for a place of rest and recuperation, where you could just, which is not a hospital, but it's not a shelter. So we started this recovery shelter with no money and most of our work, etc. But it's been so wonderfully life-saving. We see people who come in really, and we're not doing anything except just giving them a place to rest. The doctor looks in for half an hour a day. You have a trained nurse who treats their wounds. So that's the kind of need that we discovered. And then the third cluster, which we found the most challenging, is the livelihoods. And you learn slowly how people are earning their life. Like the men, the destitute men, we find they shadi ka kaam, they say, that is wedding work. In India, we have these extremely elaborate weddings, and apparently this is the only, because you need casual workers, and they recruit these people and they go out. Now I can't go to a wedding without looking at the faces of the men who serve me, because I know who they are. And they largely these homeless men, and they pay them next to nothing, they treat them very badly, etc. And they have for shorter periods, and for the rest of the time they they have to either rag pick or they go to a temple and try to get food from there. They survive this kind of thing. But the women's way that they earn their livelihoods, we found, is far more, again, violent. So that's the only thing that is left for them. So begging is one. Completely unprotected sex work on the streets is the second. Picking rags is the third. But we found two others. One was taking the clothes of the corpses in cemeteries and selling it is something that they do. And selling drugs to kids. And that last has been the most difficult for us to deal with, because whatever judgment, non-judgmentalism, whatever one believes in, it's been really hard for us to deal with women once we know that they are actually the ones who are giving drugs to the very kids that we want to protect. But that they have been, and the drug dealers use them substantially to sell drugs to kids. And there's so the violence of the streets, the violence even of the nature of way that they have to survive, characterizes life for this women. So I end here with just saying that this is a bleak sort of story that I've had to tell, and but it's important to tell it and to understand it, but to also say that they are just human beings falling in different times, and we've seen not been great work, but 30 of our men have over the last 6 months to a year actually rebuilt their lives enough to now say that they will make contact again with their families. They've gone home, they found their families. I'm not saying they were in the future and have accepted them, because before that they've also given up their drugs, they've cleaned themselves up. It is possible. And with the women, we've also seen, that's been actually much harder. I hadn't expected this, but working with homeless women has been far more challenging than men. And there's much more anger, there's much more lack of trust, very understandably. But even there we've seen, with children it's been completely wonderful. Shweta's here and she's seen that. But that's a completely different journey I'm going to talk about. But just in case we start thinking of them as people who need to be pitied, I just thought I'd end with one story. I can tell you hundreds, but I'll tell you one. This is that, in Jama Masjid itself, on cold winter nights, I talked about people having to hire blankets, quilts for 30 rupees. I noticed, just suddenly occurred to me one night that old people, disabled people, always had blankets. So I was curious. I said, they would have died the same night if they hadn't. So I said, where did these come from? So I asked the homeless younger men there, and they told me very matter of factly. But we know that these women would have died through the night, with one night if they didn't have blankets. So when we gather in the evening, the first thing we all do is to pool money to hire quilts and blankets for the old and the disabled. Then if there's money left, then we plan out what we'll do for ourselves. And they said it very, very routinely and matter of factly. And it really set me thinking that what the state should be doing and is not doing, what NGOs should be doing and are not doing, what those entrepreneurs should be doing and are not doing. Our most destitute people are doing it in the most matter-of-fact kind of way. And therefore, perhaps recognizing them as people who are coping with the most difficult circumstances that life can offer would probably make us look at them in a very different kind of way. And perhaps solidarities as they rebuild their lives would be more